Welcome back to mckilliplife. We've finished our lemon cake, so we want another dessert. I'm Amber and I'm in the kitchen today. So today I'm going to be making a berry cobbler. This particular recipe calls for blackberries, but in reality you can replace the berries with any berry. And this recipe is from the Pioneer Woman. And there's layers and layers and layers of tape on this recipe, which means I've made it many times and put it up on the cabinets. So come along for the ride. I'm going to be making this with freshly milled flour. I did soft white wheat, which is what you usually use for biscuits and cookies and that sort of thing. So I expect it to turn out wonderfully because I've had a lot of good success using soft white wheat. This evening the kitchen was very busy, so we get to do a voiceover. The first thing to do is add, the recipe calls for a cup of sugar. I've reduced it to 3/4 cup of sugar. That's in total, so this is probably about a half a cup of sugar going in at this point. And then it calls for a cup of self-rising flour, which I've never have on hand, so I do a cup of flour first, and this time I'm using the freshly milled flour with soft white wheat berries. And then to make up for the self-rising, you add an additional 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder and 1/2 teaspoon of salt, which would normally already be part of the self-rising flour. And those are your dry ingredients. You're just whisking those together. Next, it calls for milk. This is a very forgiving recipe, so I often don't use real milk, and this time I'm using almond milk. The recipe will be linked in the description below. Give it a good whisk. Then you're adding a stick of butter, which is the same thing as a 1/2 cup of butter melted. And whisk it again. And that's as simple as the batter is. Now it's just simply to pour it into the pan. Push it so it gets to all the different corners. Next we'll be adding 2 cups of berries. The recipe calls for blackberries, but most often I've done this with blueberries because that's what I usually have in my freezer. The recipe actually doesn't specify what size pan to do. This is a little bit smaller than a 9x13. This turned out to be very crispy, so if I wanted it to be more cakey, then I'd probably use a smaller pan. And then to finish, you sprinkle the top with sugar. And finally, it's baking for 50 minutes at 350. The recipe actually calls for an hour, but I've never needed that much. So the cobbler has cooled off and we have some to try. It looks a little bit different than when I usually make it. It's more brown, but I figure that's probably the fiber and bran.
Tastes good.
And still tastes yummy.
About the only thing missing is a scoop of ice cream.
But
try the ice cream with it, it's good.
It's a very forgiving recipe. I think I also put more berries than I usually do, as I actually measured them out this time. But it's still very, very yummy.
Come on, there's your piece waiting on you. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you for joining us today. Like I said, this is a very easy recipe to pull together at the last minute when you're craving something sweet. So have a good day. We are a new channel, so feel free to like and subscribe.
Thanks.